We live in two realities or two dimensions, you could say, at the same time. And so, what are the two realities? What are the two truths? Well, there is relative truth and there is absolute truth. So, what does relative truth mean? Relative truth is truth that relates to you. It's related to you like a relative in some way. How does something relate to you? I'm going to give you an example, but ultimately it just means what we would call regular truth. So, for example, we would say, oh, the sky is up. But if you're in outer space, the sky is all around you and Earth's sky is below you. So, relatively speaking, the sky is different to different people, depending on where they are at, depending on how that truth relates to them. How is it relative to them? Absolute truth is when something is true in and of itself, no matter what. Like when we say, this is the absolute truth. I absolutely know, you know what I mean? Like this is just the way it is for everybody. And you really can't find too many absolute truths in our world because we're all coming to a truth or to a reality or to an experience from a different point of view. H2O, the chemical compound, I think, of H2O, hydrogen, and I think it's two parts oxygen. I could be wrong about that, but I know it's something, right? It's some chemical compound. H2O is H2O. It's the same stuff, right? But yet we can experience H2O as liquid. We can experience it as ice, and we can experience it as steam. So it's three different things, relatively speaking, but ultimately, which is very close to the word absolutely, so I might use them interchangeably, but ultimately, whether it's water, whether it's ice, whether it's steam, it's all H2O. The steam can't tell the water, I'm better than you, because look at me, I'm floating up into the sky or something, right? It's all water. How silly would it be for water to think it's better than ice? Yeah, maybe there's some perks or maybe there's some differences, some pros and cons for each of them. But if the ice gets caught up in the fact that it's ice, it might get sad. But if the ice understands its absolute nature, that it is H2O, just like the steam, just like the water, then it's touching its absolute self, its real self, its ultimate self, and it won't be so sad. So the first example I want to give you of relative truth, and I'm not going to teach in depth on this because I got to go one, two, three, but we will talk about the Buddha's first teaching, the four. You might always hear it as the Four Noble Truths. It can be translated as the Four Holy Truths. Well, number one is the fact of suffering. He wants us to face our suffering. So many of us live our life in denial of our suffering. And that's why we distract ourselves with entertainment or drugs or alcohol. That's why we need to get people to like us or love us. And if they don't, we're just miserable. Just a couple examples because we don't want to face our suffering. Now, if we would face our suffering, and if we would dare to do that, Buddha teaches that within suffering, there's one, two, three other elements because there's four important truths. It's kind of like the eggs inside of the eggs. I think it's the Russian doll or whatever. Russian, I don't know what they're called, but there's truth inside of truth. And if we would dare to face our suffering, and I'm going to give you an example of how we can do that, what we're going to find is we're going to find the second truth. And the second truth is the cause or the reason or the why of our suffering. What brought about, number one, what brought about our suffering? What brings it about? And there's different kinds of suffering. And so we can work with each one of those things. And there is an ultimate main point or problem or a kind of suffering that we go through that Buddha talks about. But anyway, so we face the first one, and then if we dare to face the first one and be with it and not avoid it, not fight it, not fake it till we make it, just be with it, we enter into number two, which is where it came from, why it's here. And now that we know why it's here, the reality of number three is realized. Number three is the end of suffering or the cessation of suffering. We go, oh, I'm suffering. This is why I'm suffering. Oh, then if there's a why to my suffering, then if I can stop that why, there's the possibility of not having this suffering. You see, so Buddha doesn't teach suffering. He does, but he teaches that within suffering is freedom from suffering, or joy and peace and contentment and satisfaction and fulfillment. But if we can't face number one, we'll never get to number three. And so now that we see, oh, I can be free from suffering, sometimes that's enough. But we also have number four, which is the path. And it's an eightfold path. It's a path that has 8 different elements or factors in it. There's a path that can end our suffering and can keep us free from suffering. No suffering, no reason why we suffer, no end of suffering, no path to end suffering and be free from suffering, no wisdom, there is no attainment, and no non-attainment. Interesting. What's interesting is that, one of the interesting things is that he says that there is no suffering, no origin of suffering, no end of suffering, and no path to end our suffering. That's the 4 noble truths, the 4 important truths that we talked about earlier. Well, how come, and by the way, Buddha didn't say this, someone else said this, and I'm not going to say his name because I'm going to butcher it, okay? But Buddha taught the 4 noble truths, and now this person is saying there is no 4 noble truths. Well, what the heck? What's up with that? Again, relatively speaking, the 4 noble truths is a relative truth. Now we can apply it in an absolute way, but I'm not going to get into that. But this sutra and these words are trying to get us to realize an absolute truth. Because in absolute reality, in the ultimate reality that we live in alongside with relative reality, there is no suffering, but there's also no not suffering. See, the absolute truth avoids the extremes that regular thinking always gives us. Regular thinking always says there's hot and there's cold. It's one or the other. Sure, there's in between, but there's always these polarities. It's either one way or the other. That is just the mind, the relative mind trying to be in control because it's scared of just being. We like to, as humans, whether you have a big IQ or not, we like to understand things because we feel safe in that. And it's okay to understand things, but the problem is when we are attached to how we understand things, or that our understanding of things is the truth and the only truth and the absolute truth, and that's it. Any truth that you believe cannot be absolute because you are not absolute. You are relative in this world. You are just one viewpoint in many viewpoints. Your viewpoint is just what you see, your view from your point in life. But if someone else is at another point, they're going to have a different view from where they sit. So their viewpoint will be different. You could be looking at the same thing, but relatively speaking, how it relates to you, you're going to see something different. Think about the number 6, right? I'm going to try and make a 6 here. This is really bad, but I'm going to go with it. So here's the 6. If I stand over here, I see a 9. If I stand over here, I see a 6. Well, which is the truth? Maybe it's neither. Maybe it's just a freaking line. So you see, whatever we think, which is okay to do. It's okay to think. It's okay to have opinions and even beliefs and all of that stuff. But you have to understand that you could be wrong. And you have to understand that your viewpoint is going to be limited, not because truth is limited and not because there is no truth. There is absolute truth, absolute reality. But from your perspective, it's always going to be limited because you are limited and you are seen from a certain point of view, from your conditioning. Maybe your experience of life is different from mine, but we're all water. There is something that we all are. And I can't describe it because if I describe it, that's me relatively speaking. All I can do is use words to try and give you an experience of this thing, of this nature that we all partake of. And if that sounds too out there for you, or like I don't know, that doesn't make sense, I don't need that. All I can say is that Buddha and all of the Buddhas under him, Jesus and all of the mystics under him, and other religions and traditions, those are just the two that I am very familiar with. They also teach if you can touch absolute reality, absolute truth, if you can make contact with that, it will change your life. It will change your life.